"Show me $5 and I'll quit," the manager laughed. Then the homeless man shocked everyone. The envelope was already 3 years old by the time any of it mattered. Raymond Cole had been carrying it since the day his lawyer handed it to him across a scratched table in a hallway that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner. The lawyer had said, "Don't open this yet, just hold it." So Raymond held it, through winter, through 2 summers, through the kind of nights that make a man rethink every decision that ever felt right. He kept it folded in the inside pocket of his coat, pressed flat against his chest, close enough that he could feel it when he breathed. Nobody on that Cincinnati sidewalk knew about the envelope. Nobody on that sidewalk knew much about Raymond at all. That was fine with him. He had stopped needing to be known a long time ago. He sat outside Granger's Grill on 5th Street every morning starting at 7:30, not because he loved the spot, not because the view was anything worth looking at, but because the awning kept the rain off his head, the foot traffic was steady enough to keep him alert, and the wall at his back was solid. When a man has very little, he learns to value solid things. Raymond had a system. He arrived before the morning rush, when the sidewalk was still quiet and the city was just waking up. He would settle into his spot near the corner of the building, open whatever book he was reading, and he was always reading something, and he would exist there with the kind of stillness that most people spend their whole lives trying to find and never do. His coat was old, dark navy blue once, now closer to the color of a sky that can't make up its mind. The collar was starting to separate at one seam. His boots had been resoled twice with materials that were not meant for resoling boots. His hands, when he turned the pages of his book, were clean. That was the thing people sometimes noticed and then quickly forgot. His hands were always clean. He did not have a sign. He did not hold a cup toward the people walking by. On the mornings when someone dropped money near him, which happened less often than people assumed, he would look up, nod with the kind of gravity that makes a person feel they've done something real, and then return to his book. He never chased anyone down with gratitude. He never performed need. The book that particular Tuesday morning was a worn paperback copy of a collection of short stories by a writer most people have never heard of. Raymond had read it 4 times already. He read it again because good writing, he believed, was like a room you could return to. The furniture was always in the same place, but the light through the window was different every time. The morning crowd moved around him, the way water moves around a stone. Office workers with earbuds and coffee cups. A delivery man with a cart stacked high enough to be its own weather system. 2 women in matching workout clothes, talking about something that made one of them shake her head. A kid on a skateboard who took the corner too wide and nearly clipped a parking meter. Raymond watched all of it without turning his head much. He had learned to see the whole sidewalk from his eyes' corners. 3 years of sitting still in a moving world will teach a person that. At 8:15, the side door of Granger's Grill opened and Deja Washington stepped out. She was 22, small, with the kind of energy that made her seem like she was always slightly ahead of wherever she was standing. She worked the morning prep shift, which meant she arrived early and left tired, and somewhere in the middle of that she made time to nod at Raymond Cole. That was it, a nod, but it was a real nod, the kind that means I see you and I'm not going to make a thing of it. Raymond nodded back, same as every morning. Deja disappeared back inside. The door swung shut. The smell of something being cooked in butter drifted out for a moment and then was gone. Raymond turned a page. He had been on that sidewalk for almost 3 years. Before the sidewalk, there had been an apartment on the east side of the city, one small room with a radiator that clanked through the night like something trapped inside it. Before the apartment, there had been a case. Before the case, there had been a career. 16 years of it, but he did not think about the career much anymore. Thinking about it was like pressing on a bruise. You could do it, it just didn't accomplish anything. What he thought about when he let himself think was a small housing fund he had sketched out on a piece of notebook paper during one of those long apartment nights. The kind of fund that could give a man coming off the street 60 days of stability, not charity, a bridge. He had done the math more times than he could count. He knew exactly what it would take. He knew exactly where the money would go. The envelope in his coat was the reason he had not let himself throw that notebook paper away. By 9 o'clock, the foot traffic had thinned slightly. The second wave of the morning, the slower walkers, the people whose days started a little later, moved through at a different pace. A man in a very good suit walked past Granger's front entrance without looking down. A woman with a stroller navigated the narrow gap between Raymond's spot and a newspaper box with the focused expression of someone used to making it work. A teenage boy sat on the low wall across the street for a few minutes, eating something out of a paper bag, and then stood up and left. Raymond read, a man named Gerald Alcott, who appeared briefly in one of the stories as a minor character, said something in a diner that Raymond had underlined the first time he read the book. He read it again now. The thing about dignity, Gerald Alcott said to no one in particular, is it's not something other people can give you, which also means it's not something other people can take. Raymond had underlined that line with a pen that was almost out of ink, pressing hard enough that it still showed through. He looked up from the page. Across the street, the teenage boy was gone. The woman with the stroller had turned the corner. The man in the good suit was half a block away already, getting smaller. The city kept moving. Raymond was still. At some point, he didn't check the time. Two of the restaurant's line cooks came out the side door on their break. They stood a few feet away, talking in low voices, laughing at something that had happened inside. Neither of them acknowledged Raymond. One of them glanced his way once and then looked at his phone instead. Raymond did not mind. He had learned in the quiet of 3 years that being invisible to most people is not the same as being worth nothing. The two things feel identical from the outside. From the inside, there is all the difference in the world. The difference is what you carry in your chest when nobody's watching. The difference is what you know about yourself when the street is empty and the night is long and there is nothing left to perform for anyone. He knew what he had done. He knew what had been done to him. He knew the difference between those two things down to his bones. The cooks went back inside. A cloud moved and the morning light shifted slightly, coming in at a lower angle, and for a moment Raymond's shadow stretched long across the sidewalk in front of him, reaching all the way to the curb. He turned another page. There was a man coming out of Granger's front entrance. Raymond noticed him the way he noticed most things, without making it obvious that he had. The man was in his early 40s, medium height, with the look of someone who had learned to walk into rooms like he was already running them. His shirt was ironed. His shoes were the kind that get resoled by professionals, not by necessity. He had a name tag on his chest that caught the light when he turned. Raymond read the next line of his book. The man looked at the sidewalk the way some people look at their kitchen counter when there's a mess they didn't make, but are going to have to deal with anyway. Raymond turned the page. The man's name was Neil Garner. He had been managing Granger's Grill for 6 years. In those 6 years, he had made the restaurant profitable, earned 2 regional commendations from the parent company, and developed the particular kind of confidence that comes from never having been wrong in front of an audience. Raymond did not know any of that yet. What he knew was that the man was walking toward him. He did not look up from his book, not yet. He read the next sentence of Gerald Alcott's story, pressed his thumb gently against the spine to hold the page flat, and waited. The shadow reached him first. He looked up. Neil Garner looked down. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The city noise filled the space between them, a bus half a block away, someone's phone playing music without headphones, the distant sound of something being unloaded from a truck. Then Neil Garner tilted his head slightly and said, "You can't be here." Raymond looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, with the calm, level attention of a man who has spent 3 years watching the world from a seated position and has learned exactly how much of it is worth reacting to. "I'm not bothering anyone," Raymond said. His voice was even, it always was. Neil Garner glanced toward the restaurant's front window. 2 customers were visible through the glass, eating. He looked back at Raymond. "It's not about bothering anyone," he said. "It's about the image of this establishment." Raymond considered that sentence for a moment. "I'm sitting," he said, "reading a book." Neil Garner's jaw moved slightly, the way a jaw moves when a person is deciding which version of themselves to be. He chose the one that had always worked for him. He laughed. It was not a mean laugh exactly. It was something worse. It was the laugh of a man who is not taking something seriously because he has decided it is not serious. It was the laugh of a man who has never had to take anything seriously that he didn't choose to. "Look," Neil said, spreading his hands in the gesture of someone being very reasonable, "I'm going to need you to move along." "It's a public sidewalk," Raymond said. "The sidewalk in front of my restaurant." "The city's sidewalk," Raymond said, "in front of your restaurant." Neil Garner stopped smiling, not out of anger, out of something closer to surprise. He was not used to sentences like that coming from someone sitting where Raymond was sitting. He looked at Raymond for a moment. Then the smile came back, but it was different now. It had an edge to it. "All right," he said, "tell you what. You show me $5 and I'll quit bothering you." He paused and then, and this was the part that Deja, watching from the side door, would never be able to fully describe to people later, the timing of it, the absolute certainty in the man's voice, he added, "Hell, show me $5 and I'll quit my job." He said it the way people say things they are absolutely sure will never be tested. The small group that had gathered without really meaning to, two employees on their break, a man who had stopped walking to check his phone and stayed, went quiet for half a second. Then one of the break employees laughed, then the other. The man with the phone looked up and allowed himself a small smile because it seemed like the right social move. Neil Garner spread his hands again. "See. Reasonable, even funny." Raymond Cole looked at him. Not at his shoes, not at his name tag, at him. He did not smile, he did not flinch, he did not look away. He said, "Give me a moment." And he reached into his coat. Raymond Cole had not spoken about what happened to him in front of anyone in a very long time. He had been inside the legal process the way a person is inside a building during a storm, present, waiting, making the best of the conditions, believing it would eventually end. His lawyer, a quiet and thorough woman named Patricia Lennox, had told him from the beginning that the case was strong. What it was not was fast. 16 years with the parent company, Director of Regional Operations, Southeast Division. He had built 3 locations from their first month of business. He had trained managers who went on to train other managers. He had written the onboarding manual for front-of-house staff that the company still used, with his name quietly removed from the cover page during the period when his name was the kind of thing the company did not want associated with its materials. That had been the hardest part, actually, not the losing of the income, not the apartment, not the sidewalk, the removal of his name from the thing he had made. A man named Douglas Hale had done what Douglas Hale had done, moved money in a way money should not move, used access that Raymond had given him in good faith, covered tracks in ways that led directly to Raymond's desk and nowhere near Douglas Hale's. The investigation had been efficient and wrong in exactly the right order. Raymond was suspended, then terminated, then named in the internal findings. Patricia Lennox had looked at all of it and said, "This is winnable, but you need to be patient." Raymond was patient. He had nothing left to spend his patience on except the case. The apartment went after 11 months. He had made it last longer than most people would have. He sold things carefully. He ate carefully. He kept paying for the storage unit that held what was left of his actual life books, the photograph of his daughter at her college graduation, the folder that contained every document Patricia Lennox had ever sent him, neatly tabbed and in order. He found the spot on 5th Street in the second winter. The awning was the reason. The solid wall was the reason. He told himself it was temporary. Then he stopped telling himself that because the word temporary had started to feel dishonest, and he had always been a man who required honesty from himself even when he could not get it from anywhere else. Deja had started nodding at him about 8 months in. He did not know her name at first. He had learned it gradually, the way you learn anything from a sidewalk in pieces from context without asking. She was the only person who acknowledged him as a person before anything else. She did it without drama, which was the only way he would have accepted it. He respected her for that more than she knew. He read, he thought. He did the math on the housing fund again and again on the back pages of whatever notebook he was carrying. He kept the envelope flat against his chest. Patricia Lennox called him on the phone he had kept charged at the library, the phone that was registered to an address that no longer applied to his life, but that he maintained because the case required a phone number and the case was the thing he was living for. She called him on a Thursday in October. She said, "Raymond, it's done." He was standing outside the library when she said it. He put his hand flat against the brick wall of the building. He needed something solid. "How much?" he said, not a question, a sentence that required an answer. She told him. He stood there with his hand on the brick for a long time after she finished talking. The number was not a surprise exactly. He had known the range. Patricia had walked him through the likely outcomes twice a year for 3 years. But hearing the number said aloud in Patricia's precise and careful voice was different from knowing it. It moved from the part of his mind where he kept things he was waiting to believe and into the part where things were real. He said, "Okay." She said there were documents to sign. She said it would take a few more days to process. She said she was going to send him a cashier's check by courier as soon as everything cleared. She said, "Raymond, I am so glad this is over." He said, "Patricia, thank you." He took his hand off the brick. He looked at the street. It was the same street it had been 5 minutes ago. The same trees, the same parked cars, the same sky. But it was different now in the way that only things you're standing in can be different. The difference was on the inside. It was very quiet. He walked back to his spot on 5th Street, sat down, and opened his book to where he had stopped. That was a Thursday. By Monday, the courier had come to the library, to the front desk, addressed to Raymond Cole, which was a thing the woman at the front desk would later say she had not experienced before and hoped to experience again because the look on the man's face when he signed for it was something she would not forget. Raymond took the envelope to the corner of the library where he sometimes sat to read. He opened it, he looked at the cashier's check for a long time. Then he folded it very carefully and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. He put it next to the $5 bill he had been keeping there since the day Patricia called him, placed there deliberately, placed there because he had made himself know, that the day was coming when the number would be real. That was Monday. Tuesday was the morning Neil Garner walked out of Granger's Grill and looked at the sidewalk like it owed him something. Raymond reached into his coat. The people watching had expected many things: a crumpled dollar, a handful of change, an awkward, painful moment that would confirm everything they assumed about the distance between the man in the iron shirt and the man on the sidewalk. They had not expected what came out of Raymond Cole's coat. His hand was steady, his face was the same as it had been all morning. He reached past the cashier's check, past $400,000, and his fingers found the $5 bill that he had placed there on a Thursday in October when Patricia Lennox said the word "done," and the world shifted on its axis without making a sound. He held it out. Neil Garner looked at it. The small crowd looked at it. Deja in the side doorway looked at it. Raymond did not say anything. He simply held the bill out with the patience of a man who has been holding things for a long time and has learned that patience is not passive. It is a decision. Every day it is a decision. Neil Garner took the $5. He took it the way you take something that you suddenly are not sure you should have asked for. His fingers closed around it. The crowd was not laughing now. The crowd was doing that very specific thing crowds do when they realize they have been the audience for something they did not fully understand. Raymond put his hand back into his coat. Neil Garner stood there. Raymond looked up at him, not with triumph, not with cruelty, with the same level, clear attention that he had given the man from the beginning, the attention of someone who sees exactly what is in front of them. He said, "I believe you said you'd quit." His voice was the same as it had always been, even, unhurried. The words landed on the sidewalk like something being set down after a very long time of being carried. Neil Garner's mouth opened, nothing came out. His name tag caught the light. Deja pressed her hand over her mouth in the doorway, and her eyes went very wide, and she made no sound, and she did not look away. The man who had been checking his phone was not checking his phone anymore. The two cooks on break were looking at the ground. The city kept moving around all of them, the buses, the foot traffic, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning in Cincinnati, and in the middle of all that ordinary moving noise, Neil Garner stood on the sidewalk in front of his restaurant holding a $5 bill that had just rearranged everything he thought he knew about the last 5 minutes. Raymond Cole pulled his coat closed. He looked back down at his book. He found his place. He turned the page. Neil Garner stood on that sidewalk for a few seconds longer than was comfortable for anyone watching. The $5 bill was in his hand. His name tag was still catching the light, and somehow that detail made everything worse, the small gleam of it, the ordinary professional brightness of a thing that meant authority in a room that had stopped behaving the way authority was supposed to make rooms behave. He said something, nobody remembered later exactly what it was, something like "all right then," or "is that right?" Something the mouth produces when the brain has stopped contributing. Then he turned and walked back inside Granger's Grill, and the door swung shut behind him, and the small crowd on the sidewalk dissolved the way small crowds always do after the main event has passed, slowly, quietly, people drifting back to their interrupted days with expressions they would later try to describe and mostly fail to. The two cooks went in the side door without talking. Deja stood in the doorway for another moment, looking at Raymond. He did not look up. She opened her mouth and then closed it and then went back inside, because there was nothing to say that the moment had not already said more cleanly than words could manage. Raymond read to the end of the chapter. It was a good chapter. Gerald Alcott, the minor character who appeared in the story with something quietly true to say, had one more line near the end that Raymond had never underlined, had only read and let sit in his mind the way you let a song sit, not studying it, just letting it be there. Most things that look like endings, Gerald Alcott said, are just the place where a different kind of beginning had to wait for the other thing to finish. Raymond closed the book gently. His thumb held the cover shut for a moment, then he set it beside him on the ground. He reached into his coat, not to the cashier's check, not to where the $5 bill had been, but to the breast pocket on the other side where he kept his phone. The phone that had the same number on it that Patricia Lennox had been calling for 3 years. He pressed the contact that said Lucy and held the phone to his ear. It rang twice. Dad, his daughter's voice was the same as it had always been since she was 8 years old, a little faster than necessary, a little louder than the room required, full of a warmth that she tried sometimes to moderate and never quite could. "Hey, sweetheart," Raymond said. "Are you okay? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," he said, and then, because she deserved more than that, "Everything is right, I just wanted to hear your voice." There was a pause. Lucy Cole, who was 29 and lived in Columbus and had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, was quiet for a moment in the way she got quiet when she was holding something she was not sure she was allowed to feel yet. "Is it over?" she said. "Yes," Raymond said, "it's over." Another pause. He could hear her breathing. "Dad," she said it the way people say a name when the name is doing the work of a much longer sentence. "I know," he said. "Are you going to tell me the number?" "Not on the phone." "Dad." "Not on the phone, Lucy." She made a sound that was half exasperation and half relief and entirely love. "Okay," she said. "Okay, are you coming to Columbus?" "Soon," he said, "very soon." "Dad, I want—" She stopped, started again. "I have your room ready." "I've had it ready for a long time." Raymond looked at the street. A woman in a red coat walked past with a bag of groceries. A cab idled at the corner. The sky had gone from gray to something lighter, not quite blue, but moving toward it. "I know you do," he said. "Thank you for that." "Are you happy?" she said. "Are you even a little bit happy?" He thought about it. He thought about Neil Garner's face. He thought about the $5 bill and the 3 years of October nights and the envelope pressed flat against his chest and the housing fund sketched in notebook margins and Gerald Alcott and his line about the light through the window being different every time. "I feel like myself," he said. "I forgot what that was like." She was crying by then. She did it quietly, which was the opposite of everything else about her, and he let her, and he looked at the sky, and they stayed on the phone together for a while without saying much. When they hung up, he sat still for a moment. Then he put the phone back in his pocket, picked up his book, and opened it. He did not leave Fifth Street that day. There was nothing to run toward, and there was never any reason to run from. He read until the lunch crowd started to arrive and the sidewalk got busy again, and then he read through the lunch crowd because the lunch crowd, like everything else, moved around him and left him where he was. Inside Granger's Grill, things were different. Neil Garner had gone to his office and closed the door. The door had a small window in it with frosted glass, and people walking past could see the shape of him through the glass, sitting at his desk, not moving for a long time. The 2 cooks who had been on break told the rest of the staff what had happened. They told it the way people tell things they witnessed but don't fully understand yet, with a kind of reverence, a quietness, filling in the pieces they had missed with the pieces they had seen. By the afternoon, everyone who worked at Granger's Grill knew the story. By that evening, some of their family members knew it. By the following morning, it had reached people who had never set foot on Fifth Street. Neil Garner did not quit his job. Of course he didn't. Men like Neil Garner do not quit their jobs over moments of humiliation. They absorb the moment, refile it somewhere the ego can manage it, and continue. He managed Granger's Grill for another 8 months after that Tuesday, during which time he stopped coming out the front entrance during the morning hours. Raymond was not on the sidewalk for those 8 months, so it didn't matter. Deja gave her notice 2 weeks after that Tuesday. The official reason she wrote on the form was workplace culture and environment. The actual reason was that she had stood in a doorway and watched something happen that clarified for her what kind of places she was willing to give her time to, and Granger's Grill was no longer on that list. She got a job at a community kitchen 3 miles away where the pay was slightly worse and the work was slightly harder, and she arrived every morning feeling like a person. She thought about Raymond sometimes. She hoped he was okay. She had no way of knowing, which she decided to make peace with, because the world is full of stories you only get part of and you have to trust that they continued in the right direction. Raymond Cole signed the necessary documents in Patricia Lennox's office, a neat, quiet room with plants she was very serious about keeping alive. She made coffee, real coffee, in a small machine on the side table and handed him a cup and sat across from him while he read everything she had prepared, which he did carefully and completely the way he did everything. When he was done, he set the pen down. She said, "Raymond, what are you going to do now?" He looked at the coffee cup. "I have a list," he said. She smiled. It was a real smile. "Of course you do." The list had 3 things on it, in order. The first thing was a phone call to a property management company about a residential building on the east side that had been sitting partially occupied for 2 years. Raymond had been watching it since before the sidewalk. He had the address memorized. He knew the unit count, the rough cost of bringing the vacant units to livable condition, and what a 60-day transitional housing program in that building would require to operate for a full year. He had done this math 40 times. It was accurate within a margin he was comfortable with. The second thing was a visit to Lucy in Columbus. 3 days minimum. He had told her soon, and he meant it. The third thing was a return to the storage unit on the east side, where a photograph of Lucy at her graduation was taped to the inside of a box between 2 books he had been meaning to reread. He did the things in order. The property management company was interested. The building's owner, a man named Frank Darby who had inherited it from his father and didn't know quite what to do with it, was more interested than Raymond had expected. They sat in Frank's office, which smelled like takeout and had a dying plant in the corner that Patricia would not have tolerated, and Raymond talked about the housing fund the way he had described it to himself on all those notebook margin pages. Clearly, without asking for anything emotional, with numbers and a timeline and a plan that made Frank Darby sit forward in his chair. Frank said, "This is real." Raymond said, "Yes." Frank said, "You've thought about this for a long time." Raymond said, "A few years." Frank Darby looked at him for a moment in a way that suggested he was adding things up and arriving at a number he hadn't expected. He did not ask what Raymond meant by a few years. He just said, "Okay, let's talk about how this works." There was no press release. Raymond had been very specific about that with Patricia, who had flagged the possibility of media interest and received a look from Raymond that answered the question before she finished asking it. No photographs, no local news spot. No feature about the man who came back from nothing, because he did not see it as a story about coming back from nothing. He saw it as a story about what was owed, being paid, and a plan that had waited long enough. The housing fund opened its doors on a February morning with no ceremony. Raymond had arranged for a small sign above the main entrance, plain letters, nothing decorative. He stood outside for a while on the morning of the opening, not inside, not at a podium, just standing on the sidewalk in a coat that was better than the navy one but not dramatically so, because he was not a man who made dramatic gestures when quiet ones would do. A woman walked past and looked at the sign and then at him and said, "Is this new?" "Yes," he said. She nodded and kept walking. He stayed there until he was cold, and then he went inside. The first resident of the Cole transition house, Raymond had not wanted his name on it, but Frank Darby had been specific about that being a condition, and Raymond had decided one Eagle-esque concession was something he could live with was a man named Arthur Doyle, 53 years old, former automotive technician, 2 years on the street after a health crisis ate through everything he had. Arthur moved in on a gray Wednesday morning with one bag and the expression of a man who does not yet trust that real things are real. Raymond met him in the front hallway. He shook his hand. He said, "You have 60 days of guaranteed stability here. What you do with that is up to you, but the 60 days are yours. That doesn't change." Arthur Doyle looked at him. He said, "Why are you doing this?" Raymond said, "Because someone should have done it for me." He said it simply, not as an accusation, not as a speech, as a fact. Arthur nodded. He picked up his bag. He went to his room. Raymond walked out of the building. The sky was the same gray it had been that October Thursday when Patricia called him and he put his hand on the brick wall of the library. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He thought about Fifth Street. He thought about the awning and the solid wall and the mornings with the book and Deja's nod and the feel of the envelope against his chest. He thought about Gerald Alcott, the minor character, and his line about the furniture being in the same place and the light through the window being different every time. He reached into his coat pocket. His fingers found a book, the same worn paperback, the one he had been reading that Tuesday morning on Fifth Street. He had carried it with him the way he had carried everything that mattered, carefully, without making a show of it, for exactly as long as was necessary. He stood there on the sidewalk outside the building that held 60 days of solid ground for men who had nothing else, and he opened the book, and he found the page, and he read the sentence he had underlined with a pen that was almost out of ink. "The thing about dignity," Gerald Alcott said, "is it's not something other people can give you, which also means it's not something other people can take." Raymond stood there for a long time. The city moved around him. It always did. He was still. He had always been still. He closed the book and put it back in his pocket and walked down the sidewalk and turned the corner and was gone. Not because the story was over. Because some men know when a chapter has ended and the next one is already waiting, and they do not need an audience for the transition. They just walk toward it. That is enough. That has always been enough.